The gallows cast long shadows across the dusty town square of Redemption Springs. A crowd had gathered, murmuring like a nest of disturbed hornets. At their center stood Abigail Foster, her hands bound before her, golden hair falling in tangles. Around a face that looked too young to have suffered so much. She kept her eyes down, unwilling to meet the hateful stares of people who had once called her neighbor. Just 3 months ago, she had been simply Abby, the young widow raising her son alone after her husband's death in the silver mines. Now, they called her murderer, witch, and worse. The sheriff's voice cut through the noise as he read the charges against her. The cold-blooded murder of the town's most prominent rancher, Bradley Wellington. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Judge Harmon Crawford banged his gavel, silencing the crowd that had packed into the hastily constructed courthouse. The trial had become the spectacle of the decade in this small Colorado Territory town. The prosecution's case seemed airtight. Abby had been found kneeling over Wellington's body, a bloody knife nearby. No witnesses to contradict the obvious conclusion. The only voice raised in her defense was that of the town's reluctant attorney, Herbert Mills, who had drawn the short straw in being assigned to her case. "The prosecution rests, Your Honor," announced Thomas Blackwood, the county prosecutor whose ambitions for governorship were well known. He shot a satisfied smile toward the jury of 12 men, none of whom had met Abby's eyes throughout the 3-day trial. Judge Crawford nodded. "Mr. Mills, you may present your defense." Herbert Mills rose slowly. His shoulders stooped with the weight of a case he knew he couldn't win. "Your Honor, given the circumstantial nature of the evidence, I would like to—" The courtroom doors swung open with a bang that startled the bailiff into reaching for his pistol. Every head turned as a tall figure filled the doorway, backlit by the harsh afternoon sun. Whispers rippled through the room as the stranger stepped inside. His spurs clinked against the wooden floor, the only sound as he made his way down the center aisle. Dust clung to his long coat, and the shadow of his hat brim concealed most of his face. But there was no hiding the intensity of his steel blue eyes as they fixed on Abigail Foster. "Who are you, sir?" Judge Crawford demanded, clearly irritated by the interruption. "This is a court of law." The stranger removed his hat, revealing a weathered face framed by dark hair streaked with silver at the temples. A long scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, pulling his mouth into a permanent half-grimace. But it was the quiet authority in his stance that commanded attention. "Wyatt Stone," he said, his voice like gravel, unused and rough. Some of the older townsfolk gasped at the name. "I have testimony in this case." Blackwood was on his feet immediately. "Objection. The prosecution has concluded its case. We can't allow random drifters to—" "Are you calling me a liar, counselor?" The quiet way Stone asked the question silenced Blackwood more effectively than the judge's gavel. Judge Crawford studied the newcomer. "Mr. Stone, are you saying you have direct knowledge regarding this case?" "I do." 3 syllables, spoken with such certainty that even the most skeptical jurors straightened in their seats. Abby lifted her head for the first time, confusion written across her features. She had never seen this man before in her life. Of that much she was certain. Yet something in his unwavering gaze made her heart beat faster with a dangerous emotion she had nearly forgotten. Hope. "Your Honor," Mills jumped in, suddenly energized. "The defense requests permission to call this witness." The judge frowned, considering. Court procedures were still somewhat flexible in the territories, especially in matters of life and death. He nodded finally. "I'll allow it. Mr. Stone, approach the bench and be sworn in." As Wyatt Stone strode forward, his eyes never left Abby's face. In that moment, something unspoken passed between them. A promise, perhaps, or a secret understanding. Whatever it was made Abby sit straighter in her chair, her chin lifting just enough to reveal the quiet dignity that weeks of imprisonment had failed to crush. The bailiff held out a Bible. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?" Stone placed his hand on the book, his scarred fingers stark against the black leather. "I do." "Proceed," Judge Crawford instructed, leaning forward with undisguised curiosity. Taking the witness stand, Stone removed his gloves methodically, exposing hands marked by years of hard work and harder fighting. Then he looked directly at the jury and spoke the words that caused every person in the courtroom to freeze in disbelief. "Bradley Wellington wasn't murdered," he said calmly. "He was killed by me, in self-defense." The courtroom erupted. Women gasped, men shouted, and Judge Crawford pounded his gavel frantically. "Order! I will have order!" Through it all, Wyatt Stone sat motionless, his eyes fixed on Abby. And for the first time since her arrest, she allowed herself to wonder if she might see her son again after all. But as the commotion settled, Blackwood approached the witness stand, a predatory smile spreading across his face. "How convenient, Mr. Stone, that you appear just as the noose is tightening. Tell me, why should anyone believe a word from a stranger who rides into town claiming responsibility for a murder that has an obvious culprit?" Stone didn't flinch. "Because, Mr. Blackwood, I have something Mrs. Foster doesn't." "And what might that be?" Stone's eyes narrowed slightly. "Proof." Outside the courthouse, a storm was gathering on the horizon, dark clouds rolling in from the mountains. Inside, an equally powerful storm was brewing, one that would change the course of Abigail Foster's life forever. She stared at the mysterious stranger who had just claimed to have killed the man she was accused of murdering, and found herself wondering whether she was looking at her salvation or another version of damnation entirely. "Proof?" Blackwood scoffed, playing to the jury. "And what proof could possibly exonerate Mrs. Foster when she was found with the victim's blood on her hands?" Wyatt Stone reached into his coat, causing the bailiff to step forward nervously. But, instead of a weapon, he withdrew a folded piece of paper. "This telegram," he said, sliding it toward the judge, "from the U.S. Marshal's office in Denver confirms I've been tracking Wellington for 3 months. His real name was Benjamin Thorne, wanted for swindling widows and murdering at least 2 husbands in Kansas Territory." The paper crackled loudly in the sudden silence as Judge Crawford examined it. Abby felt the room spin around her. Wellington, the man who'd been so kind, who'd offered to help with her land claim after learning she was struggling to feed her son, had been a criminal all along? "That only establishes the victim's character, not your claim," Blackwood countered, though his confidence had visibly faltered. Stone nodded once, then unbuttoned his shirt collar and pulled it aside, revealing an angry red wound still healing on his shoulder. "Wellington's bullet, 2 weeks ago, when I confronted him outside of Cannon City. He escaped, and I tracked him here. Herbert Mills found his courage." "Your Honor, if Mr. Stone is telling the truth, Mrs. Foster is being prosecuted for a death that was not only justified but committed by someone else entirely." Blackwood slammed his hand on the railing. "This changes nothing. We still have a witness who saw Mrs. Foster at Wellington's ranch house that night." "Jacob Winters," Stone said quietly. The prosecutor froze. "How could you possibly—" "Because Winters works for the same criminal outfit Wellington did. He's watching this courtroom right now." Stone's eyes scanned the gallery until they locked on a thin-faced man near the back who was already rising from his seat. "That's him." Everything happened at once. Winters bolted for the door. 2 men Stone must have positioned outside tackled him to the floor. Women screamed. The bailiff drew his gun. And through it all, Wyatt Stone never raised his voice or moved. "From the witness stand. Check his right boot," Stone directed the men restraining Winters. "You'll find a knife identical to the one used on Wellington." The bailiff retrieved a bone-handled knife from Winters' boot, matching exactly the murder weapon displayed as evidence. Judge Crawford banged his gavel repeatedly. "Order! I will have order in this court." When the chaos subsided, he glared at Stone. "While I appreciate your intervention, sir, this is highly irregular. You claim to have killed Wellington in self-defense, yet you bring evidence implicating another man entirely." Stone's expression remained unchanged. "I wounded him in our first encounter, tracked him here, found him dead when I arrived. Mrs. Foster was already there trying to help him." "Then why claim you killed him?" the judge demanded. "Because a jury would sooner believe a stranger killed him than accept a mother's innocence." His eyes found Abby's again. "And I couldn't let her hang." The simple truth in his words stilled every heart in the courtroom. Abby felt tears gathering. In her eyes, the first she'd allowed herself since her arrest. "And how?" Blackwood asked, desperation creeping into his voice. "Do you explain Mrs. Foster's presence at the scene?" Before Stone could answer, Abby found her voice. "I went to tell him I couldn't accept his loan." The words came slowly at first, then in a rush. "He'd offered to help with my mortgage, but that night I discovered papers in his desk showing he'd been buying up foreclosed properties. I realized he was trying to take my land too. When I confronted him, he was already wounded, bleeding badly. I tried to help him, but he died while I was there." Judge Crawford considered both testimonies, then sighed heavily. "This court will recess while I consider these new developments. Mrs. Foster will remain in custody until—" "Your Honor," Stone interrupted, stepping down from the witness stand to stand directly before the bench. "I have one final piece of evidence." From his pocket, he withdrew a small object that glinted in the light, a wedding band. The courtroom held its collective breath. "Mrs. Foster cannot return to jail," Stone said, his voice filling the silent room. "As of this morning, she is my wife." Gasps rippled through the spectators. Abby's mouth fell open in shock. Nobody noticed the small boy who had slipped into the back of the courtroom, his eyes wide as he watched the proceedings that would determine his mother's fate. Stone turned to face the crowd. "We were married by Reverend Thomas at first light. By territorial law, she's now under my protection." Judge Crawford's face reddened. "This is outrageous. You cannot simply—" "Check with the Reverend," Stone suggested calmly. "The documents have been filed." The judge dispatched the bailiff, who returned 15 minutes later with confirmation. The marriage certificate was legitimate. Under frontier law, a husband could indeed claim custody of his wife, even one awaiting trial. This is highly irregular," Judge Crawford sputtered. Blackwood was fuming. "Your Honor, this is clearly a scheme to—" "To what?" Stone's voice hardened for the first time. "Save an innocent woman? Protect a child from becoming an orphan?" He held up the telegram again. "I've done my duty to the law. Wellington, or Thorne, won't harm anyone else. Justice is served." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The judge's chambers were stifling despite the open window. Abby sat rigidly in a wooden chair, her wrists finally free of shackles but her mind imprisoned by confusion. Across from her, Wyatt Stone stood by the window, his profile sharp against the afternoon light. "Why?" she finally managed. One word that contained every question, churning inside her. Stone turned. Up close, his eyes weren't cold as they had appeared in court. They held depths of something she couldn't name. "Your boy," he said simply. "Saw him in town 3 days ago, asking everyone if they could help his mama." The mention of her son broke something inside her. "Jamie? You've seen Jamie? Is he—" "He's fine. Been staying with the blacksmith's wife. Brave kid." Tears spilled down Abby's cheeks. For 3 months, she'd been separated from her son, allowed only brief weekly visits. The thought of holding him again made her dizzy with longing. The door opened, and Judge Crawford entered, followed by Blackwood and Mills. The judge settled heavily behind his desk. "Mrs. Stone," he began, the name awkward on his tongue. "While I find these developments highly unusual, The evidence Mr. Stone has provided does cast significant doubt on your guilt. He shot an irritated glance at the prosecutor. Furthermore, the witness against you has now been implicated in the same criminal enterprise as the deceased. Blackwood opened his mouth to object, but Crawford silenced him with a raised hand. In light of these circumstances, and with the additional complication of your recent marriage, I am dismissing the charges against you. The words took a moment to penetrate. Dismissed. Free. Abby swayed slightly in her chair. However, the judge continued sternly, I want both of you out of my jurisdiction by sundown tomorrow. This case has been disruptive enough to our community. Stone nodded once. Planned on it. Crawford fixed him with a hard stare. And Mr. Stone, if I discover this marriage is some kind of ruse, it's not. The certainty in his voice surprised even Abby. After they left the judge's chambers, Abby found herself standing in the harsh sunlight of the town square, blinking like a creature too long in darkness. People hurried past, some avoiding her eyes, others staring openly. The whispers would continue, she knew. Even exonerated mud-stuck. Mama! The cry cut through everything. Abby turned just as a small body hurtled into her skirts. She dropped to her knees, gathering her son into her arms with a sob that came from the deepest part of her soul. Jamie, oh my Jamie. She pressed her face into his hair, breathing in his scent, feeling his solid warmth against her. Nothing else mattered in that moment. Not the stairs, not the uncertain future, not the stranger who was now legally her husband. Over Jamie's shoulder, she watched Stone talking quietly with two men, the ones who had apprehended Winters in the courtroom. Even in conversation, he maintained that stillness, that economy of movement that marked him as dangerous. Jamie pulled back, his small hands framing her face. Are you coming home now, Mama? The simple question brought reality crashing down. There was no home anymore. The bank had surely seized their cabin and land months ago. And now there was this marriage, a salvation she hadn't asked for and didn't understand, Mrs. Stone. It was the first time he had addressed her directly by that name. Stone stood a respectful distance away, hat in hand. We should go. Sunset's coming, and we've got ground to cover. Abby rose slowly, keeping Jamie's hand firmly in hers. Where exactly are we going? Husband? The word felt foreign on her tongue. Something flickered in his eyes. Not quite a smile, but close. North. Got a place near the Wyoming line. Good grazing land. And then what? She challenged, finding strength in her son's presence. Stone looked down at Jamie, then back at her. That's for you to decide. The marriage is real enough for the law. Beyond that, he shrugged. I keep my promises, Mrs. Stone, and I promise you this. No harm will come to you or your boy while I draw breath. It wasn't love. It wasn't even affection. But in that moment, standing in the dust of a town that had been ready to hang her, Abby recognized it for what it was. A chance. More than she'd had yesterday. More than she'd dared hope for this morning. We'll need to gather our things, she said finally. Already loaded on the wagon. At her surprised look, he added, Wasn't much left. Most was sold off to pay your lawyer. Bitter truth stung, but she squared her shoulders. Then I guess we're ready. As they walked toward the livery where a wagon waited, Jamie looked up at the tall stranger beside them. Are you my new pa now? Stone glanced down, that almost smile touching his lips again. No, son. But I'll do right by you both. From her cell window, Abby had watched 92 sunsets, each one possibly her last. As this one painted the sky behind them, the town of Redemption Springs growing smaller in the distance, she realized she was heading into territory far more unknown than death. Beside her on the wagon seat, Wyatt Stone drove in silence, his profile etched against the crimson sky. Jamie slept between them, exhausted by emotion and excitement. This man had saved her life with a lie that was legally true. A stranger who was now her husband, taking them to a home she'd never seen. "I don't even know you," she said finally, her voice barely audible above the creak of wagon wheels. Stone was quiet so long she thought he might not answer. Then, without looking at her, he said, "That goes both ways, Mrs. Stone." The simple truth of it hung between them as the first stars appeared overhead. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it as strangers bound by the most intimate of legal ties. And somehow, as the wagon rumbled northward into the gathering darkness, Abby found herself more afraid of the unknown future than she had been of the gallows. They traveled for 3 days, the rhythm of their journey as steady as Stone's silence. Each night, he built their camp with practiced efficiency, fire blazing before sunset, bedrolls arranged with Jamie's between theirs, coffee brewing by first. Light. He spoke only when necessary, using words sparingly like a man rationing the last drops in his canteen. On the 4th morning, Abby woke to find him teaching Jamie how to whittle. Her son's face was screwed up in concentration as Stone guided his small hands on the knife, showing him how to carve with the grain. The domesticity of the scene struck her speechless. "Not too deep," Stone murmured. "Let the wood tell you where. It wants to go." Jamie nodded solemnly, treating each word like gospel. Abby recognized the hunger in her son's eyes, the desperate need for a man's guidance he'd been missing since his father died. "Did you have a pa who taught you?" Jamie asked, looking up at Stone. Something darkened in the man's expression. "No, learned by watching." "Like me," Jamie grinned, revealing the gap where his front tooth had recently fallen out. Stone's hand stilled on the knife. "No, boy, you're luckier than that." His eyes flicked up, meeting Abby's across the camp. Heat rushed to her cheeks at being caught, watching them. She busied herself with the coffee pot, pretending she hadn't been memorizing the way his scarred hands moved so gently with her son. By midday, the landscape had changed dramatically. The flat plains gave way to rolling foothills, and in the distance, the blue shadows of mountains cut a jagged line against the sky. Stone pointed north toward a valley nestled between 2 sloping ridges. "There," he said simply. "Home." Abby shielded her eyes against the sun. "How much farther?" "Be there by nightfall." As they drew closer, she began to spot cattle grazing on the hillsides, healthy animals with the distinct S-S brand on their flanks. Stone's ranch was clearly no small operation. "You have hands?" she asked, suddenly self-conscious about what awaited them. Stone nodded. 3 good men. "And they know about this arrangement?" His eyes remained fixed on the trail ahead. "Told them I was bringing home a wife and child. Rest isn't their business." The implications washed over her. To the world, they were truly husband and wife. The question of what that meant behind closed doors hung between them, unaddressed. Jamie had fallen asleep again, lulled by the wagon's movement. Abby gathered her courage. "Mr. Stone?" "Wyatt," he corrected. "If you're going to wear my name, might as well use it." "Wyatt," she amended, the name strange on her tongue. "I need to understand what you expect from this marriage." The reins tightened almost imperceptibly in his hands. For several long moments he said nothing. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower than usual. "Expect you to raise your boy in peace. Expect to provide what you both need. Expect you to run the household as you see fit." He paused. "Don't expect anything else." Relief and something oddly like disappointment mingled in her chest. "And what do I call you when people ask? My rescuer? My benefactor?" This time the almost smile appeared. "Husband works fine in public." "And in private?" "Whatever lets you sleep at night." The answer should have reassured her. Instead, it left her feeling hollow. This man had risked everything to save her life, married her to secure her freedom, and now offered her a home with no strings attached. Her instincts whispered there must be more to his story, more to his motivations than simple altruism. "Nobody does something for nothing," she said quietly. "Not in my experience." Stone's eyes remained on the trail, but a muscle tightened in his jaw. "Then your experience has been poor." Before she could respond, he pointed toward a plume of smoke rising from the valley. "There it is." Stone Ranch emerged from the landscape like something from a dream. A sprawling two-story house built of solid timber and local stone, with a wide porch wrapping around 3 sides. A large barn, bunkhouse, and various outbuildings formed a half-circle behind it. Cottonwoods lined the creek that cut through the property, their leaves shimmering gold in the late afternoon light. 2 men stepped out of the barn as the wagon approached, and a third appeared on the porch. Abby felt their curious gazes and fought the urge to shrink into herself. She was not a criminal. She would not act like one. "Boss." The oldest of the men strode forward, weathered face breaking into a smile beneath his gray mustache. His grin faltered slightly when he saw Abby and Jamie, but he recovered quickly. "Got everything ready like you asked." "Appreciated, Frank." Stone set the brake and jumped down from the wagon. "Mrs. Stone, this is Frank Hollister, my foreman. Frank, my wife Abigail, and her son Jamie." Frank removed his hat. "Ma'am, young sir, welcome to Stone Ranch." "Thank you," Abby managed, fighting the surreal feeling that threatened to overwhelm her. Yesterday, she had been a convicted murderer awaiting execution. Today, she was being welcomed as the mistress of this substantial property. Stone lifted a still sleeping Jamie from the wagon and then offered his hand to Abby. She hesitated only briefly before taking it, hyper-aware of the calluses against her palm as he helped her down. The simple contact sent an unexpected jolt through her arm. The house was even more impressive inside. Spacious rooms with solid furniture, polished wooden floors, a kitchen that would make any frontier woman weep with joy. Stone carried Jamie to an upstairs bedroom already prepared with a small bed, then showed Abby to what was clearly the master bedroom. "Had it built 3 years ago," he explained, watching her take in the 4-poster bed, the dresser carved with intricate patterns, the braided rug that softened the wooden floor, never quite finished furnishing it. "It's beautiful," she whispered, unable to hide her awe. After the cramped cabin she'd shared with Jamie, this room felt like a palace. "Thought you might want to add your touches. Make it yours." He cleared his throat. "I'll be taking the room across the hall. Both have locks. Keys are inside." The implication was clear. Her privacy would be respected. She turned to face him fully, trying to reconcile this considerate host with the dangerous man who had commandeered a courtroom and claimed her as his wife with such authority. "Why did you really do this?" she asked directly. "The truth, please." Stone held her gaze for a long moment. Then, with a sigh that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside him, he moved to the window overlooking the valley. "My sister," he said, finally. 18 years ago, she was accused of a crime she didn't commit. No one believed her. No one stood for her. His fingers curled against the windowsill. "She hung before I could get there." The confession stunned her. "I'm sorry," Abby whispered. He nodded once, accepting her words. "Saw your boy in town, heard your story. Couldn't let it happen again." The simple explanation broke her heart in ways she hadn't expected. This wasn't charity or manipulation. It was atonement. What was her name? Sarah. He spoke it like a prayer. Outside, the ranch hands were unloading the wagon. Life continued, practical and immediate. But in this room, time seemed suspended as Abby absorbed the weight of what Wyatt Stone had revealed. "I'll never be able to repay what you've done," she said softly. He turned back to her, his face partially shadowed. "Not asking you to." After Stone left her to settle in, Abby sat on the edge of the bed, running her hands over the handmade quilt. The enormity of her changed circumstances crashed over her in waves. She was free. Jamie was safe. They had a home, protection, security, all because of a man who had turned his own grief into her salvation. At dinner, Frank and the other two, Hans, brothers named Cal and Mitch Harper, joined them at the large kitchen table. The men were clearly curious about their boss's sudden marriage, but too respectful to ask direct questions. Jamie, fully awake now and buzzing with excitement about his new surroundings, filled the silence with chatter. "Is that a real bearskin?" he asked, pointing to the rug by the fireplace. Cal grinned. "Sure is, little man. Boss took that grizzly down himself after it got into our winter stores 2 years back." Jamie's eyes widened as he turned to Stone with newfound admiration. "All by yourself?" "Had help," Stone replied, nodding toward the men. "Always need good men at your back in bear country." "Can I learn to shoot?" Jamie asked. "Pa was teaching me before." His face fell as he remembered. Abby reached for her son's hand, but it was Stone who answered. "When you're ready, start with a rifle, not a handgun. Learn respect for the weapon first." The conversation shifted naturally to ranch matters, cattle to be moved to summer pasture, fencing that needed repair, a mare about to foal. Abby found herself drawn into discussions of the garden, which had been neglected since Stone's last housekeeper left 3 months prior. "Mrs. Hollister comes up from town to help with the big stuff," Frank explained, "but Boss has been making do since. Martha left to care for her ailing mother." "I'll see to it tomorrow," Abby said, grateful to have something useful to contribute. Later, after Jamie had been tucked into his new bed with promises of exploring the ranch tomorrow, Abby found herself alone on the porch with Stone. The night was clear, stars scattered like diamond dust across the black sky. "Your men seem good people," she observed. Stone nodded. "Frank's been with me since I bought this place. Boys joined 2 years ago. Their father was killed in the war. They respect you. They know where they stand with me." "And where do I stand, Wyatt?" She hadn't planned to ask the question, but now it hung in the air between them. Stone was silent for so long she thought he might not answer. When he did, his voice was rough with some emotion she couldn't name. "Wherever you want, Abby. This place?" He gestured to the ranch spread before them. "It's yours now, too. Papers are in my desk. If anything happens to me, it all goes to you and the boy." She gasped. "But you hardly know us." "Know enough." He turned to face her, his expression intense in the moonlight. "Know you'd kill to protect your son. Know you tried to help a dying man even though he meant to take your land. Know you faced hanging without breaking." His voice softened. "That's more than enough to know." The weight of his trust overwhelmed her. She'd been judged and found worthy by a man who clearly valued discernment above all else. "I want to make this work," she said finally. "For Jamie's sake, for what you've done for us. I need time." He nodded, understanding what she couldn't quite articulate. "Time's something we have plenty of now." As if to punctuate his words, a shooting star blazed across the sky, leaving a trail of silver in its wake. Abby made a silent wish, not for love or even happiness, but simply for peace. After everything she'd endured, that seemed miracle enough. Inside the house, Jamie slept peacefully for the first time in months, secure in the knowledge that his mother was safe, and that a man who could kill bears now stood between them and danger. And if the child dreamed of someday calling that man Pa, those dreams remained his secret. The seasons on the frontier marked time more definitively than any calendar. Summer blazed with relentless heat, turning the valley golden. The high garden Abby coaxed back to life yielded a bounty that filled the root cellar and pantry. Jamie grew an inch, learned to ride a gentle mare Stone selected especially for him, and spent hours shadowing the ranch hands as they worked. Abby found her place more gradually. She transformed the grand house into a home with small touches, wildflowers, in mason jars, curtains sewn from fabric ordered from Denver, her mother's recipes brought to life in the spacious kitchen. She kept the books for the ranch, discovering a head for figures that impressed even the taciturn Frank. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, something shifted between her and Stone. It wasn't romance, not exactly, but a partnership built on mutual respect and shared purpose. They still slept in separate rooms, still maintained careful boundaries, but their conversations grew longer, their silences more comfortable. By early autumn, when the aspens turned to flame against the mountainside, Abby realized she had stopped thinking of leaving, stopped planning for the eventuality that this arrangement would end, started imagining a future that stretched beyond the next day or week. The revelation came as she watched Stone teaching Jamie how to mend a bridle. The boy's dark head bent close to the man's, their expressions equally serious as they worked the tough leather. Her son had stopped asking when they would return to their old home, had started referring to the ranch as our place without hesitation. That night at dinner, after the hands had retired to the bunkhouse and Jamie to his bed, she broached the subject that had been weighing on her mind. "Harvest festival's coming up in town," she said, keeping her tone casual as she dried the last plate. "Jamie's never been." Stone looked up from the ledger he was reviewing at the table. "Want to take him?" "I thought we might all go, as a family." The word slipped out before she could reconsider it, his pen stilled on the page. "Town's 20 miles off. People there might have heard about my trial? About our unusual marriage?" She set the plate down with more force than necessary. "I won't hide forever, Wyatt. Neither should you." He studied her with those penetrating eyes that seemed to see straight through her defenses. "Not asking you to hide, just making sure you know what you'd be facing." "I faced the gallows. I think I can handle a few whispers." She softened her tone. "Jamie needs to see more than just the ranch, and I need to know if I can stand tall again in public." Stone closed the ledger. "Then we'll go. First frost should hit next week. We'll head to town after." The simple acceptance of her wishes, without argument or conditions, made her throat tighten unexpectedly. "Thank you." He rose from the table, pausing beside her on his way out. For a moment she thought he might touch her, a hand on her shoulder perhaps, or even her cheek. Instead, he simply said, "You're stronger than you know, Abby Stone." The use of her married name, his name, sent an unexpected warmth through her. In the months since their hastily arranged union, he had rarely addressed her so directly, as if hesitant to claim the connection between them. That night, lying in her comfortable bed with the window cracked to let in the crisp autumn air, Abby faced a truth she'd been avoiding for weeks. Somewhere along the way, gratitude had transformed into something deeper, more complicated, more frightening. She had begun to care for Wyatt Stone in ways that had nothing to do with debt or obligation. Begun to notice the rare smiles that transformed his scarred face. Begun to look forward to their quiet evenings on the porch, watching the stars emerge as they discussed the day's events. Begun to wonder what it might be like to truly be his wife, in every sense of the word. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. Their arrangement had been practical, born of desperate circumstances. To want more seemed greedy, ungrateful even. And yet, a sound from across the hall interrupted her thoughts. Stone's door opening, his footsteps descending the stairs. Curious, she wrapped her shawl around her nightgown and followed quietly. She found him in the study, a lamp burning low as he stood before the fireplace, staring at a small framed photograph in his hands. His shoulders, usually so straight and sure, were bowed as if bearing an invisible weight. "Wyatt," she called softly from the doorway. He turned, surprise flickering across his features before his expression settled into its customary calm. "Didn't mean to wake you." "You didn't." She hesitated, then moved into the room. "Couldn't sleep." His eyes tracked her movement, and she became acutely aware of her thin nightgown beneath the shawl. But there was nothing inappropriate in his gaze, only a weary sadness that made her heart ache. "Is that her?" Abby asked gently, nodding toward the photograph. "Your sister?" Stone looked down at the image in his hands. After a moment's hesitation, he extended it toward her. The woman in the photograph was young, perhaps 20, with the same intense eyes as her brother. Her smile, captured forever in sepia tones, held a hint of mischief that suggested a lively spirit. "She was beautiful," Abby said truthfully. "Smart, too. Too smart for her own good sometimes." His voice carried the rough edges of grief never fully processed. Today would have been her birthday. Understanding dawned. "I'm sorry, Wyatt. I didn't know." "No reason you should." He took the photograph back, his fingers brushing hers in the exchange. "It was a long time ago." "Some wounds don't heal with time." His eyes met hers, recognition flickering in their depths. Abby realized he was seeing her not as his convenient wife or his good deed, but as someone who understood loss intimately. Someone who carried her own scars. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken possibilities. Then Stone carefully returned the photograph to its place on the mantel. "Best get some rest," he said, his voice gentler than she'd ever heard it. "Morning comes early." But neither moved toward the door. Instead, Abby found herself crossing the space between them, her heart pounding wildly in her chest. Before courage could desert her, she placed her hand on his arm. "You're not alone anymore, Wyatt," she whispered. "Neither of us is." His muscles tensed beneath her touch. For one terrible moment, she thought he would pull away, retreat behind the walls he'd built around himself. Instead, his hand came up, to cover hers, warm and solid and real. "Abby," he said, just her name, but it contained volumes. The study door creaked. They stepped apart as Jamie appeared, rubbing his eyes sleepily. "Mama, I had a bad dream." Reality reasserted itself as Abby went to her son, smoothing his tousled hair. "It's all right, sweetheart. Dreams can't hurt you." "Can I sleep with you tonight?" Jamie asked, leaning against her side. "Of course." She glanced back at Stone, who had already retreated behind his neutral expression. The connection between them, so tangible moments ago, seemed to evaporate like morning mist. "Good night, Wyatt," she said, trying to convey everything she couldn't say aloud with her eyes. He nodded once. "Good night, Abby." As she led Jamie back upstairs, Abby felt the weight of possibilities between them. Something had shifted. Tonight, a door cracked open that had previously been locked tight. Whether either of them was brave enough to step through remained to be seen. In the morning, frost glittered on the grass for the first time that season, transforming the ranch into a crystalline wonderland. And as Abby watched Stone showing Jamie how the ice formed in delicate patterns on the porch railing, she realized that her heart, so long frozen in survival mode, was finally beginning to thaw. The journey to town revealed how much had changed in 6 months. Jamie bounced on the wagon seat between them, pointing out every hawk and deer with unbridled excitement. Abby sat straighter as they approached the cluster of buildings that marked civilization, refusing to hunch her shoulders or lower her eyes. Stone drove with one hand on the reins, the other resting near his holster, a habit so ingrained he likely didn't notice it. But Abby did. For all his calm demeanor, he remained vigilant, ever watchful for threats to his household. His household. The thought still startled her sometimes. The main street of Elk Creek was lined with the usual frontier establishments, general store, livery, saloon, church, and a handful of newer businesses that spoke to the town's growth. People paused in their activities as the wagon rolled past, curious eyes taking in the trio. "That's Wyatt Stone," Abby heard someone whisper. "With his new family." New family. The words warmed her despite the autumn chill. Stone pulled up in front of Willoughby's general store, setting the brake before jumping down to help Abby. His hands lingered at her waist a moment longer than necessary before he lifted Jamie to the ground. "Mrs. Stone," he said formally, loud enough for passers-by to hear. "I need to see about those cattle posts. Meet you back here in 2 hours?" Abby nodded, understanding his intent. By addressing her properly in public, he established both her position and his expectations that others would respect it. "Come along, Jamie," she said, taking her son's hand. "Let's see what Mr. Willoughby has in stock." The bell above the door announced their entrance. Inside, 3 women browsing fabrics fell silent, their eyes widening in recognition. Abby squared her shoulders and nodded politely. "Good morning," she said, voice steady. "Jamie, look at those candy sticks. Which color would you like?" Her deliberate normalcy seemed to break the spell. The storekeeper approached with professional courtesy, if not warmth. "Mrs. Stone," he greeted her. "Heard you'd settled up at the Stone Ranch. What can I help you with today?" By addressing her by her married name, he acknowledged her new status, whatever his personal thoughts might be. "We need supplies for the Harvest Festival," she explained. "And fabric for winter clothes. Jamie's growing like a weed." The storekeeper relaxed slightly. "Got some fine wool just in from back east. Mrs. Willoughby says it's the softest she's seen." As Abby examined the fabric, the women gradually resumed their shopping, though she felt their glances. One eventually approached, a slight woman with kind eyes. "Mrs. Stone, I'm Elizabeth Cooper. My husband's the new schoolteacher." She offered her hand. "We arrived last month. I heard there was a boy up at Stone Ranch who might be school age." The simple, friendly overture brought unexpected tears to Abby's eyes. She blinked them away quickly. "Yes, my Jamie. He'll be 7 in December. Perfect age to start learning his letters, if he hasn't already." Mrs. Cooper smiled at Jamie, who was busy examining a spinning top. "School meets 3 days a week. Several children ride in from outlying ranches." "He knows some basics," Abby said, pride evident in her voice. "His father taught him before." She trailed off. Understanding flickered in Mrs. Cooper's eyes. "Well, he'd be most welcome. We have 8 students now. 9 would make for better." Spelling competitions. The casual invitation, the normalcy of it, felt like a gift. "I'll discuss it with my husband," Abby replied, the term still new on her tongue. After selecting their purchases, Abby and Jamie stepped back onto the boardwalk. The festival preparations were evident throughout town. Cornstalks and pumpkins, adorned storefronts, and a large area near the church had been cleared for dancing. "Mama, look!" Jamie tugged her hand, pointing toward the smithy where a man was shoeing a magnificent black stallion. "That's the biggest horse I ever saw." The horse's owner stood nearby, a tall man whose expensive clothing marked him as someone of means. He turned at Jamie's exclamation, his gaze sliding from the boy to Abby. Something in his expression changed, a slow smile spreading across his handsome face. "Well, now, what have we here?" he said, approaching them with the confidence of someone unused to rejection. "Don't believe I've had the pleasure, ma'am." "Mrs. Stone," Abby replied, deliberately emphasizing her married status as she placed a protective hand on Jamie's shoulder. If the name registered, he didn't show it. "Nathaniel Burke," he introduced himself with a slight bow. "Just acquired the Wellington property south of town." Wellington. The name sent a chill through Abby. This man had purchased the dead swindler's ranch. "Lovely to meet you, Mrs. Stone," Burke continued, his eyes lingering on her face. "I don't recall seeing you in town before. New to the area?" Before she could answer, a shadow fell across them. Stone stood at her side, his presence sudden and solid as a mountain. "My wife's been busy at the ranch," he said, voice deceptively mild. "Mr. Burke." Burke's smile faltered slightly. "Stone. Didn't realize you'd married." 6 months now," Stone replied, his hand coming to rest at the small of Abby's back, a gesture both protective and possessive. "I see you've met my family, Thay." Word sent a jolt through Abby. Not my wife and her son, but my family. An important distinction, especially in front of a man who clearly hadn't recognized her name or connection to the Wellington case. "Indeed," Burke said, recovering his charm. "Was just telling Mrs. Stone I've acquired the old Wellington spread, planning to expand my operations. Perhaps we'll be neighbors soon." Something dangerous flickered in Stone's eyes. "Wellington's property borders the south section of my range." "So I've discovered." Burke's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Seems there's some dispute about water rights on Cottonwood Creek. My lawyers are looking into it." The subtle threat hung in the air. Abby felt Stone's body tense beside her. "Jamie," she said brightly, breaking the tension. "Why don't you show Wyatt the top Mr. Willoughby showed us? The one that spins all the way across the floor?" Her son's excited chatter created the diversion she needed. With polite nods, they extricated themselves from Burke's presence. But as they walked away, Abby felt the man's gaze following them. "What was that about?" she asked quietly when they were out of earshot. Stone's expression was unreadable. "Nothing for you to worry about. If it concerns our home, it concerns me," she countered. The possessive pronoun caught his attention. His eyes searched her face, finding whatever reassurance he needed there. With a sigh, he guided them toward the wagon. "Wellington was trying to dam Cottonwood Creek before he died," he explained as they loaded their purchases. "Would have cut off water to my south pastures, had already filed false claims with the land office. And now Burke has those claims," Abby realized. "Is he like Wellington? A swindler?" "Worse," Stone said grimly. "Wellington worked alone. Burke has connections, political ones, and a reputation for getting what he wants." The implications settled like a stone in Abby's stomach. Their peaceful existence suddenly felt precarious. "Should we be worried?" she asked as Stone helped her onto the wagon seat. His hand squeezed hers briefly. "No, I've dealt with men like Burke before." It wasn't quite an answer, but it was all she would get for now. As they drove toward the festival grounds, Abby noticed how people nodded respectfully to Stone, many even offering a smile or word of greeting to her. Whatever whispers might circulate, his standing in the community afforded her a measure of protection. The festival itself proved more enjoyable than Abby had dared hope. Jamie threw himself into the children's games, winning a sack race that brought a rare, full smile to Stone's face. Women who had been coolly polite in the store thawed considerably upon discovering Abby's talent for pie making. And when Stone led her onto the makeshift dance floor for a Virginia reel, the simple joy of movement after months of confinement nearly overwhelmed her. "You're doing fine," he murmured as they circled each other, following the pattern of the dance. But it wasn't the dance steps Abby was struggling with. It was the way his hand felt against hers, warm and solid. The way his eyes never left her face, as if memorizing every expression. The way her heart quickened when the dance brought them together. As evening fell, lanterns were lit around the grounds, casting golden pools of light against the gathering darkness. Families with younger children began departing. Jamie, exhausted from excitement and sugar, was asleep on a bench beside Frank, who had joined them later in the day. "Should head back soon," Stone said, watching as Burke moved through the remaining crowd, stopping frequently to speak with town officials. Abby followed his gaze. "He's making allies. Smart man would." He offered her his arm. "One more turn around the dance floor before we go." The band had shifted to slower melodies. Couples swayed together in the lantern light, many resting their heads on partners' shoulders. It was the sort of intimacy Abby and Stone had never shared. "People will talk," she said, even as she placed her hand in his. The corner of his mouth lifted. "Let them." He led her to the edge of the dance floor, where shadows provided some privacy. His hand settled at her waist, holding her at a respectable distance as they began to move to the music. But something had shifted between them, a tension that had nothing to do with Burke or the whispers of townsfolk. "Thank you," Abby said, softly. "For today. For everything." Stone's eyes held hers. "Don't thank me yet." "Why not?" "Burke's not going away. What he wants, he usually gets." "And what do you want, Wyatt?" The question slipped out before she could reconsider. His steps faltered slightly. For a moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then his hand tightened almost imperceptibly at her waist. "Peace," he said finally. "Safety for you and the boy." Is that all? She hardly recognized her own boldness. The music swelled around them. Stone drew her fractionally closer, their bodies now separated by mere inches instead of the proper distance. "No," he admitted, voice rough. "That's not all." Before he could elaborate, a commotion near the refreshment tables drew everyone's attention. Burke stood arguing with an older man whose weather-beaten face suggested a lifetime outdoors. "You calling me a liar, old man?" Burke's voice carried clearly across the grounds. The older man stood his ground. "I'm saying Wellington never owned that water right legally, and neither do you. That creek's been open range for 30 years, Orks." Hand moved toward his gun. Instantly, Stone released Abby and stepped forward. But before he could intervene, the sheriff appeared, placing himself between the antagonists. "That's enough, gentlemen," the lawman said firmly. "Mr. Burke, we don't settle disputes that way in Elk Creek." Burke's hand fell away from his weapon, but his expression remained murderous. "This isn't over," he warned the older man before stalking away. The festive mood had shattered. Parents gathered their remaining children, couples headed for wagons, and horses. Stone collected Jamie, who didn't stir as he was carried to their wagon. The ride home was silent, each lost in their own thoughts. Jamie slept between them, his head eventually coming to rest against Stone's arm. Abby watched her husband's profile in the moonlight, the strong lines etched with concern. "It's about more than water rights, isn't it?" she asked finally. Stone glanced down at Jamie, then back at the road. Burke worked for the same outfit Wellington did. Eastern investors buying up land, forcing out small ranchers. They've been moving west for years. And now they want your land? Want the whole valley. He adjusted his grip on the reins. Already bought out the Hartmans last spring and the Wilsons this summer. I'm the last holdout. The revelation stunned. Why didn't you tell me? Didn't want you to worry. I'm your wife, she said, surprising herself with the vehemence in her voice. Even if it started as convenience, I deserve to know our home might be threatened. Stone was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was low, meant only for her. You're right, should have told you. The simple admission, without defense or qualification, disarmed her. This man who had saved her life, given her a home, and treated her son with gentle respect, was now acknowledging her right to be treated as a true partner. What will we do? She asked, the we deliberate and significant. His eyes met hers in the darkness. Fight, if it comes to that. The words settled between them, a promise and a warning both. As the ranch came into view, lamplight glowing in windows Frank must have lit before coming to town, Abby made her decision. Whatever storm was coming, they would face it together. Not as a man and his convenient wife, but as true partners. And perhaps, someday, as something more. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Winter descended on the valley with unexpected ferocity. Snow piled in drifts against the barn, and ice froze the creek solid. Inside the ranch house, however, warmth prevailed. The kitchen stove burned constantly, filling the home with the scents of Abby's baking. Jamie started attending school 3 days a week, riding with Frank or Cal when weather permitted, his mind flourishing under Elizabeth Cooper's tutelage. Stone spent long days with the cattle, ensuring they survived the harsh conditions. He returned each evening frostbitten and exhausted, but something in his demeanor had softened. He lingered at dinner, listening to Jamie's school tales. Joined Abby by the fire as she mended or read, shared more of himself in quiet conversations that stretched into the night. The festival confrontation with Burke faded into memory as immediate concerns, keeping livestock alive, maintaining supplies, surviving until spring, took precedence. But Abby hadn't forgotten. Whenever Stone received correspondence from the county seat, his expression darkened. Whatever legal maneuvering Burke was attempting continued behind the scenes. Christmas approached, bringing with it Jamie's 7th birthday. Abby secretly sewed him a proper winter coat, while Stone carved an elaborate set of wooden animals when the boy wasn't watching. The celebration would be modest by Eastern standards, but richer in meaning than any Abby had known. 3 days before Christmas, a fierce blizzard descended without warning. Stone and the hands rushed to bring the nearest cattle into sheltered draws, fighting whiteout conditions as temperatures plummeted. By nightfall, Abby paced anxiously at the window, lamp burning bright to guide them home. Frank and the Harper brothers arrived first, nearly frozen in their saddles. They reported that Stone had gone to check the south pasture where several calves had been spotted earlier. "Should have been back by now," Frank said, concern etching his weathered face as he thawed by the fire. Storm came on too fast. Midnight passed with no sign of Stone. By 2, even Jamie had abandoned hope of sleep, sitting beside Abby at the window, his small face pinched with worry. "He'll come back, Mama," he whispered. "He promised to teach me checkers tomorrow." Abby pulled him close, drawing strength from his unwavering faith. "Of course he will, sweetheart." But as dawn approached with no hoofbeats in the yard, fear clutched at her heart. Stone knew the ranch better than anyone. If he hadn't returned, "I'm going to look for him," Frank announced, already pulling on his barely dried coat. "Not alone," Cal insisted. "We'll take different sections." "The South Line shack," Abby suggested. "He might have sheltered there." The men nodded grimly. No one voiced what they all knew. Finding someone in the aftermath of a blizzard would be nearly impossible. As they prepared to leave, the sound of approaching horses cut through the howling wind. Abby flung open the door. 3 riders emerged from the swirling snow. The first was Stone, slumped in his saddle but upright. Behind him rode 2 strangers supporting a third figure draped unconscious across a horse. "Wyatt!" Abby rushed forward, heedless of the snow. "Thank God!" Stone practically fell from his horse into her arms, his body alarmingly cold. "Found them. Lost in the storm," he managed, gesturing to the strangers. "Burke's men. Surveying the boundary line." Understanding dawned as Frank and the brothers helped the newcomers inside. Burke had sent men to examine the property line in the middle of winter, a reckless, potentially fatal mission. And Stone, despite everything, had risked his life to save them. Hours later, with all 4 men warmed, fed, and tended to, Abby finally had a moment alone with Stone in their bedroom, where she'd insisted he rest. His hands and feet had suffered mild frostbite, but the doctor who'd been summoned assured them no permanent damage had been done. "You could have died out there," she said, unable to keep the tremor from her voice as she changed the bandages on his hands. Stone watched her work, his expression softer than usual. "Couldn't leave them, even knowing they work for the man trying to take our home?" The word "our" slipped out naturally now. Man's intentions don't condemn his hired hands. He winced as she wrapped a particularly tender spot. Besides, what kind of example would that set for Jamie? The simple statement revealed so much about the man she'd married. Whatever violence lurked in his past, whatever capability for danger still resided in him, his moral compass remained true. "You're a good man, Wyatt Stone," she said quietly. "Better than most." His scarred hand captured hers, stilling her movements. "No, just trying to balance accounts. Your sister?" She'd wondered if his rescue mission connected to his past. He nodded slightly. "She died because men who could have helped chose not to." His eyes held hers. "Won't be that man. Ever." The conviction in his voice moved her deeply. Without thinking, she leaned forward and pressed her lips gently to his forehead. Not a passionate gesture, but one of profound tenderness. Stone went utterly still beneath her touch. When she pulled back, his eyes had darkened with an emotion she recognized but hadn't seen directed at her in a very long time. Desire. The realization sent heat rushing to her face. She made to rise, suddenly uncertain, but his hand caught hers. "Again, Abby," he said, her name rough in his throat. "I need to ask something." She nodded, not trusting her voice. "Are you happy here, with this life?" The question wasn't what she'd expected. She considered it seriously, knowing he deserved complete honesty. "I was content when you brought us here," she began slowly. "Grateful for safety, for a chance to raise Jamie in peace." Her fingers tightened around his. "But now?" "Yes, Wyatt. I'm happy. Happier than I thought possible after everything that happened." Something eased in his expression. "Been thinking about what you said. About being true partners." He struggled to find the right words. "Want that? Want to be a real husband to you, if you'll have me?" The directness of his proposal, for that's what it was, stole her breath. This wasn't about convenience or obligation anymore. This was about choice. His and hers. She began, but a knock at the door interrupted her. Jamie peeked in, his face lighting up when he saw Stone awake. "You're better." He rushed to the bedside. "Frank said you were the bravest man he knows." Stone ruffled the boy's hair with his bandaged hand. "Frank exaggerates. Did you really save those men from the storm? Like heroes in my books?" "They would have done the same." Stone's gaze lifted to Abby's. "Sometimes people just need a chance to do the right thing." The moment between them, that suspended breath of possibility, remained unresolved as Jamie launched into a detailed recounting of his vigil at the window. But something had shifted irrevocably. A door had been fully opened between them. Walking through it was now simply a matter of timing. Christmas morning dawned clear and bright, the storm's fury replaced by diamond-like brilliance as sunlight reflected off unbroken snow. Jamie woke the household at dawn, his excitement infectious as they gathered around the small pine tree Stone had somehow managed to find and set up despite his injuries. The boys' delight at his new coat and carved animals brought tears to Abby's eyes. Her own gift from Stone, a finely crafted silver locket containing a small photograph Frank had taken of her and Jamie in the garden, left her speechless. "It's beautiful," she whispered as he fastened it around her neck, his fingers lingering against her skin. "Had it made in Denver?" he admitted. "Frank brought it back last month." The planning involved touched her deeply. This wasn't an impulsive gesture, but one he'd arranged weeks ago. Her gift to him was more modest, a hand-knitted scarf and a journal bound in leather she'd ordered through Mr. Willoughby. "For your thoughts," she explained as he ran his fingers over the blank pages. "You keep so many inside." Something like wonder crossed his face. "Never had anyone pay such attention to what I might need." The day unfolded in quiet joy. A special dinner, carols around the fire, stories shared as snow. began falling again outside. By evening, Jamie had fallen asleep amid his treasures, and the hands had retired to the bunkhouse with bellies full and spirits high. Abby and Stone stood on the porch, wrapped against the cold as they watched the snow descend in gentle flakes. The question he'd asked in the bedroom, the one she hadn't had a chance to answer, hung between them. "Wyatt," she began, turning to face him in the lantern light. "What you asked me earlier?" He waited, patient as always, his eyes never leaving her face. "I married you for safety," she continued, choosing her words carefully. "Out of necessity. I never expected," she gestured between them, "this, whatever has grown between us." "Understand if it's too soon," he said, already offering her a way out. "After everything you've been through—" "No," she interrupted, finding courage in the depth of feeling that had built over these months. "That's not what I'm saying at all." She stepped closer, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from him despite the winter chill. "I'm saying yes," she whispered. "Yes, I want a real marriage. With you." For a heartbeat, he remained perfectly still. Then his hands came up to frame her face, his touch achingly gentle despite their strength. "Been wanting to kiss you since that day in the courtroom," he confessed, his voice rough with emotion. "Never thought I'd have the right." "You have the right," she assured him, rising on tiptoes to meet him halfway. "You've earned it in 1,000 ways." Their lips met in a kiss that began tentatively, a question asked and answered, before deepening into something both had longed for but neither had dared hope possible. When they finally broke apart, breathless and slightly dazed, Abby felt as though something fundamental had shifted in her universe. "Come inside," she whispered, taking his hand. "Come home." His fingers interlaced with hers as they returned to the warmth of the house that had become their sanctuary. Whatever challenges awaited them, Burke's scheming, the harsh realities of frontier life, the ghosts of their respective pasts, they would face them together, no longer as strangers bound by necessity, but as true partners bound by choice. And as Stone closed the door behind them, shutting out the cold and the darkness, Abby knew with absolute certainty that the silent verdict rendered that day in court had brought her not just freedom, but the kind of love stories were written about, the kind that began in desperate circumstances but blossomed into something unbreakable, the kind that would last a lifetime. Spring's arrival brought new beginnings to Stone Ranch. Snow melted into rushing streams, calves dotted the greening pastures, and wildflowers erupted across the valley floor in splashes of color. The transformation outside mirrored the one within, the ranch house, where formality had given way to genuine family bonds. Abby no longer slept in the room across the hall. Each night, she now rested in Wyatt's arms, her husband in truth as well as law. Jamie had flourished through winter, his nightmares about the gallows replaced by dreams of cattle drives and horses. He shadowed Stone constantly, absorbing every lesson about ranching with solemn attention. One crisp March morning, as they broke their fast in the kitchen, Frank knocked urgently at the door. "Riders coming," he announced, his expression grave. "Burke's men. Lots of them." Stone's jaw tightened as he rose from the table. "How many?" 10, maybe 12. Armed. "Wyatt." Abby's voice remained steady despite the fear clutching at her heart. He squeezed her shoulder gently. "Take Jamie upstairs. Stay there until I call." She wanted to protest, to stand beside him against whatever threat approached. But Jamie's safety came first. With a nod, she gathered their son and hurried upstairs, though not before retrieving the rifle Stone had taught her to use during the winter months. Through the bedroom window, she watched the approaching riders, a column of dark figures against the spring greenery, Burke himself leading them astride his black stallion. They halted in the yard, spreading out in a half circle facing the house. The message was clear: intimidation. Stone stepped onto the porch, Frank and the Harper brothers flanking him. Though outnumbered, they presented a united front. "That's far enough, Burke," Stone called, voice carrying in the morning air. Burke urged his mount forward a few paces. "Beautiful morning for a ride, isn't it, Stone? Thought I'd bring some friends to see this famous ranch of yours." "Private property," Stone replied evenly. "Wasn't aware we had an appointment." Burke's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Matter of fact, we do, just not one you knew about." He withdrew a document from his coat. "Court order from Judge Phillips. Your water rights claim has been denied. Cottonwood Creek now falls under my jurisdiction." Even from her vantage point, Abby could see Stone's shoulders stiffen. "Let me see that," he demanded. Burke tossed the paper toward him. "It's all legal. Signed, sealed, and delivered. You've got 30 days to remove your cattle from the south pasture or pay for water access." Stone read the document slowly, his expression unreadable. Frank and the brothers exchanged worried glances. "Phillips was appointed 3 months ago," Stone observed. "Man's never even visited this valley." "Funny how things work out." Burke's smug satisfaction was evident. "I'd start moving those cattle if I were you. Clock's ticking." For a terrible moment, Abby thought Stone might go for his gun. Instead, he folded the paper deliberately. "I'll have my lawyer review this," he said, his voice deceptively mild. "Meantime, I'd appreciate you and your men leaving my property." Burke's smile faltered slightly at Stone's composure. He'd clearly expected anger, perhaps even violence that would justify his show of force. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," Burke advised. "I can be reasonable if you're willing to sell. Otherwise—" He gestured to his armed men, the threat implicit. Stone didn't flinch. "You've delivered your papers. Now get off my land." Something dangerous flashed in Burke's eyes. "Think carefully, Stone. A smart man knows when he's beaten. And an observant man," came a new voice from behind Burke's group, "would notice he's caught in a crossfire." Marshal Thomas Jenkins sat astride his horse at the edge of the yard, 4 deputies positioned strategically behind him. How they'd approached unnoticed spoke to their skill. Burke turned, his confident demeanor slipping. "Marshal, this is a private matter between landowners." "Making threats with armed men doesn't look particularly private to me," Jenkins replied, urging his horse forward. "Nor does presenting allegedly legal documents with 12 guns backing them." Stone's expression remained neutral, but Abby could sense his surprise. The marshal wasn't a close ally, had, in fact, kept a professional distance since their arrival. "In the territory." "Mr. Burke was just leaving," Stone said. Jenkins nodded. "Good, because I'd hate to arrest anyone for intimidation or illegal assembly." He fixed Burke with a hard stare. "Especially someone with outstanding warrants in Missouri." The color drained from Burke's face. "What are you talking about?" "Telegrams are marvelous things," Jenkins remarked conversationally. "Been corresponding with a sheriff in Kansas City who's mighty interested in your business practices there. Seems your investors have some questions about missing funds." Burke's men began shifting uncomfortably in their saddles. "This is outrageous," Burke blustered. "I'll have your badge for this." "You're welcome to try," Jenkins replied. "After you, answer those charges in Missouri." His hand moved meaningfully toward his gun. "Now, as Mr. Stone suggested, I believe it's time you and your men departed." The standoff lasted only moments before Burke jerked his reins, wheeling his horse around. "This isn't over," he growled as he passed Stone. "For your sake," Stone responded. Quietly, "I hope it is." They watched in silence as Burke and his men rode away, the marshal's deputies trailing at a discreet distance to ensure they left Stone property. Only when they disappeared beyond the ridge did Jenkins approach Stone. "Figured he might try something like this when I received that telegram yesterday." "Appreciated," Stone said, extending his hand. "But unexpected." Jenkins clasped his hand firmly. "Let's just say I've developed an interest in seeing justice properly." Served after that business with Mrs. Stone last year. His weathered face creased in a slight smile. Speaking of whom, you might want to tell your wife she can lower that rifle now. Stone glanced up at the bedroom window where Abby stood guard, the barrel of her Winchester visible against the glass. Their eyes met across the distance, and something passed between them. A recognition that each would fight with every weapon available to protect what they had built together. That evening, after Jamie had been tucked into bed with extra stories, to settle his excitement over the day's events, Abby and Stone sat on the porch beneath a sky drowning in stars. The marshal had departed hours earlier with promises to handle Burke's fraudulent court order. "Think he'll come back?" Abby asked, her head resting comfortably against Stone's shoulder. "Not if he's smart." His arm tightened around her. "But
men like Burke rarely know when to quit." She traced the scar along his jawline with gentle fingers. "You didn't tell me you were fighting the water rights claim in court."
"Didn't want you worried." He caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "Seems I'm still learning how to be a proper husband." "And I'm still learning to be a proper wife," she admitted. "One who doesn't aim rifles out of windows." His low chuckle vibrated against her side. "Thought that part was particularly proper myself." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of the ranch, distant lowing of cattle, the soft whicker of horses in the barn, the rustle of wind through new leaves. "Jamie asked me something today," Abby said finally. "Something I wasn't sure how to answer." Stone waited, giving her space to continue at her own pace. "He asked if he could call you Pa." She felt him go still beside her. "I told him that was something he should discuss with you." When Stone didn't immediately respond, she looked up to find his eyes suspiciously bright in the moonlight. "Would that be all right?" she asked softly. "If he saw you as his father?" Stone's voice, when he finally spoke, was rough with emotion. "Never thought I'd have a family. After Sarah died, figured I'd live and die alone." His fingers threaded through hers. "Then I saw him in that town, asking everyone to help his mama. Saw myself in him, desperate, scared, alone." "And now?" Abby prompted when he fell silent again. "Now I can't imagine life without either of you." He turned to face her fully. "Yes, Abby. I'd be honored if Jamie called me Pa, but only if you're certain that's what you want too." In answer, she leaned forward and kissed him, pouring all her certainty into the gesture. When they separated, breathless beneath the vast canopy of stars, she rested her forehead against his. "I was sentenced to die," she whispered. "Instead, I found life, real life, Wyatt, with you." He gathered her closer, his strength a shelter against memories of those dark days. "Still don't know if I deserve this happiness." "None of us deserves the worst or best things that happen to us," she replied. "We just have to recognize the gifts when they come, however unlikely their packaging." His soft laugh warmed her heart. "Never figured myself for a gift." "The best kind," she assured him. "The kind that saves you when hope seems lost." The following Sunday, they attended church in Elk Creek together for the first time. Abby felt the stares as they entered, but they lacked the hostility she'd feared. Many nodded respectfully, some even smiled. Elizabeth Cooper waved them to a pew near her family, Jamie immediately engaging in whispered conversation with their son. After the service, as they stood in the churchyard, Reverend Thomas approached. Abby tensed slightly, remembering this was the man who had married them that fateful dawn before her charges were dismissed. "Mrs. Stone," he greeted her warmly. "It's good to finally meet you properly." She glanced at Stone, confused by the welcome. "The Reverend and I had a long conversation last month," Stone explained, his hand steady at the small of her back. "Your husband is an honorable man," Reverend Thomas added, "though I confess, when he asked me to perform that ceremony so hastily, I had my doubts." His kind eyes crinkled. I'm pleased to see those doubts were unfounded. As they made their way back to the wagon, townspeople stopped them repeatedly. Not with accusations or suspicion, but with genuine neighborliness. Invitations to socials, questions about cattle, offers to trade goods. What changed? Abby wondered aloud as Stone helped her onto the seat. He glanced back at the gathered community, many still watching them with interested eyes. You did, he said simply, standing tall instead of hiding, living honestly instead of in fear. We did, she corrected, making room for Jamie between them. Together. On the ride home, Jamie chattered excitedly about school friends and Sunday dinners and swimming holes when summer came. Small, ordinary joys that had seemed impossibly distant during those long months in her cell. Stone listened attentively, offering comments and questions that delighted the boy. But occasionally his gaze would meet Abby's over Jamie's head, conveying everything words couldn't capture: gratitude, wonder, and a love that had grown from the most unlikely soil. As they crested the final ridge, Stone Ranch spread before them, bathed in spring sunshine. Cattle dotted the emerald pastures. Fruit trees bloomed white and pink around the yard, and smoke curled lazily from the chimney where Frank had maintained the fire during their absence. Home, Abby thought. Not just shelter or safety, but truly. Home! Race you to the barn! Jamie called suddenly, urging his pony forward the moment they reached the yard. Stone let him win, naturally, watching with poorly concealed pride as the boy dismounted with growing skill. When Jamie ran to help Frank with afternoon chores, Stone turned to find Abby still seated on the wagon, her eyes suspiciously bright. Something wrong? He asked, immediately concerned. She shook her head, smiling through unshed tears. Something right, she corrected. Everything right. He helped her down, but instead of releasing her, he kept his hands at her waist. Had something made in town, he said, uncharacteristically hesitant. Been carrying it for weeks, waiting for the right moment. From his pocket, he withdrew a simple gold band. Thought you might want a proper wedding ring, one you chose for yourself, not just for convenience. Abby stared at the ring, then at this man who continued to surprise her with the depth of his understanding. Their first marriage had been one of desperate necessity, a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. This ring represented something entirely different: choice, commitment, love freely given and received. It's perfect, she whispered, extending her hand. He slid the ring onto her finger, where it caught the afternoon light. Like the woman wearing it, the compliment made her blush despite their months together. Pretty words from a man who rarely uses them. Save them for what matters, he replied, drawing her close. Over his shoulder, she could see Jamie emerging. From the barn, Frank gesturing animatedly about something while the boy nodded with solemn attention. Beyond them, the ranch stretched in all directions, the legacy they would build together, the future they had almost lost. You know, she said thoughtfully, I never properly thanked you for what you did that day in court. Stone shook his head. Don't need thanks for doing what's right. Not thanks, she corrected, rising on tiptoes to whisper in his ear. But perhaps proper appreciation? The spark that ignited in his eyes sent warmth cascading through her. Without warning, he swept her into his arms, eliciting a startled laugh that drew Jamie's attention from across the yard. Pa's carrying. Mama, the boy shouted delightedly to Frank. Like in the stories. The name, Pa, stopped Stone in his tracks. His eyes found Abby's, seeking confirmation. He decided, she said softly. This morning, said he wanted to surprise you. Something shifted in Stone's expression. A softening, a completion, as if the final missing piece of his life had just clicked into place. Without setting Abby down, he turned toward Jamie. Come on, son, he called, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes. Let's go home. And as they crossed the threshold together, a family created not by blood but by choice, by courage, by love that had bloomed in the shadow of the gallows. Abby knew they had written an ending far different from the one the town of Redemption, Springs, had planned for her. Not an ending at all, in fact, but a beginning. 1 year to the day after Stone had walked into that courtroom and claimed her as his wife, Abby stood in the bedroom of their ranch house, smoothing the fabric of a new dress she'd sewn for the occasion. Behind her, Stone fastened the silver locket around her neck, his fingers lingering against her skin. "Ready?" he asked, meeting her eyes in the mirror. She nodded, turning to face him. "Never thought we'd be celebrating this day." "Day I got the only thing worth having," he said simply. Outside, wagons were arriving for the gathering they'd organized, a combination anniversary celebration and community reconciliation. The marshal and his wife, Elizabeth and Thomas Cooper, even Herbert Mills, who had reluctantly defended Abby at her trial. Frank had spent days preparing a feast, and the Harper brothers had constructed tables beneath the cottonwoods along the T. Creek Jamie burst into the room, resplendent in his Sunday best. "Everyone's here! Frank says to hurry before the chicken gets cold." Stone ruffled the boy's hair. "Can't keep Frank waiting, can we?" As they descended the stairs together, Abby's hand tucked securely in Stone's arm, Jamie racing ahead, she reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From condemned prisoner to respected rancher's wife, from desperate mother to woman fulfilled, from the shadow of death to the fullness of life. The afternoon sun painted everything in golden light as they stepped onto the porch. Their guests turned as one, raising glasses in greeting. No whispers, no sidelong glances, only genuine welcome. Mrs. Stone, Reverend Thomas approached with a warm smile. "I was telling your husband I'd be honored to perform a proper ceremony today. A renewal of vows, if you'd like." Stone's questioning gaze found hers. "Your choice," he said quietly. "Always your choice." And there it was, the difference between their beginning and now. Choice. Freedom. The space to decide her own path without fear or desperation driving her actions. Abby looked at the man beside her, the silent cowboy who had testified and married. Her, who had given her son a father and her heart a home. Who had proven day after day that some men's actions spoke far louder than others' empty words. "Yes," she said, squeezing his hand. "I'd like that very much." They gathered beneath the cottonwoods, the same creek that had once been the subject of conflict, now providing a peaceful backdrop to their celebration. Jamie stood proudly at Stone's side, holding the new ring they would place on his finger. As the sun began its descent toward the distant mountains, painting the valley in hues of gold and amber, Reverend Thomas spoke words of union and commitment. But it was the vows, simple, heartfelt promises exchanged between two people who had already weathered storms together, that brought tears to more than one eye. "Abigail," Stone said, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his gaze, "I take you as my wife not from obligation or duty, but from choice and love. Everything I have is yours. Everything I am is better because of you." The words, so many more than this private man usually strung together, settled into Abby's heart like seeds finding fertile soil. When her turn came, she spoke clearly, wanting everyone to hear. "Wyatt, you stood for me when I couldn't stand for myself. You offered shelter when I had none. You saw worth in me when others saw only guilt." Her voice caught slightly. "I take you as my husband, freely and completely, promising to stand beside you through whatever storms may come." The simple gold bands they exchanged held none of the desperation of their first union, only the quiet certainty of two lives intentionally woven together. "By the authority vested in me," Reverend Thomas concluded, his face wreathed in smiles, "I now pronounce you husband and wife." Again, he added with a wink that drew appreciative laughter from the gathering. As Stone leaned down to seal their vows with a kiss, Jamie's excited voice piped up, "Does this mean I'm getting a new paw again?" The laughter that erupted was warm and genuine. Stone crouched down to the boy's level, his expression serious despite the joy evident in his eyes. "No, son," he said, loud enough for all to hear. "It means you already have one. For good." Later, as lanterns glowed against the gathering dusk and music from Cal's fiddle lifted spirits and feet alike, Abby found herself momentarily alone, watching. Her husband and son demonstrate a roping trick to the Cooper children. Mrs. Stone. She turned to find Marshall Jenkins beside her, hat in hand. "Marshall," she greeted him warmly. "Thank you for coming today." He nodded, his weathered face thoughtful. "Wanted you to know, Burke won't be troubling you again. Those Missouri warrants were real enough. He'll be facing trial back east." Relief washed through her. "That's welcome news." "Your husband knew, I think," Jenkins continued. "Could have handled Burke himself. Chose a different path." He glanced toward Stone, who was now swinging Jamie in wide circles to the delight of watching children. "Changed man from the one I used to hear stories about?" Abby smiled, recognizing the veiled reference to the prairie shadow legend that occasionally surfaced in hushed conversations. "We all change, Marshall. Sometimes we just need the right reasons." Jenkins nodded thoughtfully. "Justice comes in strange forms sometimes." "Yes," she agreed, watching as Stone set Jamie down and looked up, his eyes finding hers across the gathering with unerring precision. The most silent verdicts are often the most profound. As darkness finally claimed the valley and stars punctured the velvet sky overhead, guests departed with warm wishes and promises of future visits. Jamie, exhausted from excitement, fell asleep on Frank's shoulder and was carried to bed with murmured goodnights. Finally alone, Abby and Stone stood on their porch, his arm around her waist as they gazed at the vastness above them. "Happy?" he asked simply. She leaned into his solid warmth. "Beyond anything I could have imagined." "That day in the courtroom," he said after a comfortable silence, "when I claimed you as my wife, never thought we'd end up here." "Where did you think we'd end up?" she asked, curious about this rare glimpse into his thoughts from that time. He considered her question carefully. "Thought maybe you'd stay until you found your feet. Move on to something better. Something better than a legendary gunslinger with a heart bigger than the Montana sky?" She smiled up at him. "Not possible." His laugh was soft in the darkness. "Not the legend anymore. Just a rancher with a wife and son to protect." "And that's enough?" she asked, suddenly serious. "This quiet life, after everything you've been?" Stone turned her gently to face him, his hands framing her face with calloused tenderness. In the moonlight, she could see every line etched by sun and struggle, every shadow cast by memories he would never fully share. "This life with you and Jamie?" he said softly. "It's everything." As his lips found hers in a kiss that spoke of beginnings rather than endings, of promises kept and futures secured, Abby surrendered to the knowledge that some verdicts were never spoken aloud but lived every day in the choices we make and the loves we hold dear. And as Stone gathered her close under a canopy of stars, she offered a silent prayer of gratitude for the silent cowboy who had saved her life not once, but every day since, with his strength, his honor, and finally, his love. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.